Welcome, fellow adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Andrew Pappas about the importance of understanding your audience, an age-old, incredibly important subject.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give game devs the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. This is a mostly unedited recording of a weekly event we host here on our Discord every Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Feel free to swing by and join us for the next one. Ask your own questions live. There are links to join down below. As always, I'm your host, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster of the Indie Game Academy and the self-proclaimed Wizard of Joy, the purple wizard of GDC this year. And I am so happy to welcome onto the stage Andrew Pappas. Andrew is a games marketing consultant and strategist and is here to teach us how we do audience good and actually make money with our games. Andrew, welcome to the stage. What are you having for lunch today?
Definitely appreciate you having me here and having the opportunity to share, like you said, this important topic. So
awesome. Well, it's wonderful to have you here. I think I work pretty exclusively, not quite exclusively, I guess, but definitely majority of the people that I work with are juniors and indies. And those two people, I feel, fall into some of the exact same traps when it comes to marketing. And there's two. One of them is one that you're directly answering with this topic. The first one is they just build a game and then they assume there's people who are going to want to play it. The second one is they hate marketing and think it's evil and don't want to do it. And they would just release a game into the void and assume that it's going to get played. So I am excited to have you here because I'm trying to break our community of these two ancient habits. But before anything else, we have to start with the traditional first question of this podcast, which is for your origin story. So Andrew, tell us about where you are today and how you got there.
Okay, so today I am have my own business running Rengen Marketing. I'm the founder, and I work with a small team that helps me with things. But ultimately, I'm a consultant that just helps guide people, with their marketing, whether it be small indie devs all the way up to some small to medium-sized studios. So how I got here, it's, I guess, kind of interesting story, but at the same time, it's something I'm finding more and more common throughout the industry, which is great to hear. So basically, I started off going to film school, and while in film school, I realized, hey, as an independent filmmaker, in order to kind of get out there and be known and things like that, you need to know how to market yourself. But then I ended up switching gears and then made a career out of marketing. But with that said, I always had a deep passion for video games. I mean, I am very grateful that for whatever reason, my parents decided to get as many consoles for me as they could. And I don't know why they rewarded me with such, but it really had a big impact on my childhood and up until now. But anyway, so with that passion, I eventually got to a point where I want to, do more with that, but also how could I, and at that time, the indie game scene was really coming out. I mean, I remember when Minecraft was nothing, but still emerging into something big, and a lot of other titles like Indie Game Movie, I'm sure all of you are familiar with. That was a big, important time of my, life where I was like, wait, I think there might be more something and I want to get involved because it's so exciting. And then I realized that, hey, look, I have this love and passion for marketing, but also with games. And I'm seeing that there's a need for better understanding, more resources, knowledge and such in this area. And I basically kind of paved my way through. I mean, my career was into doing a lot of work with B2B, B2C, basically agencies that serve everything from customers to other businesses all over different industries. And because of that breadth of experience and background in all different areas, I'm like, there's a lot of things missing in this industry. And slowly I just kind of paved my way through to where I am now. And it's just been a really exciting time ever since.
That's awesome. It's definitely a real gift that your parents bought you consoles all day. In my own household, we had to sneak them in. So wonderful that you got that initial experience. And yeah, it's definitely interesting that you largely sort of found your way to games, and that's something that I hear pretty often. There's obviously people who start in this industry just because they're excited, they're passionate, they know they want to build games from the moment, they even came to understand what games are. But there's also people like you who are trying out different things and sort of find your way to games. So I would love actually an intro as well to what Rengen does. So give me like a little bit of background on what your marketing firm does now at this point.
Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward in terms of we will call it a consultancy. But more so than anything, I approach it as, we're just a guide. We're just someone to help understand what your needs are, your interests, as it relates to your business and your projects, and kind of guide you along the way. Because let's face it, there's lots of ways to do marketing and everything else like that. But we have to be understanding and realistic of, okay, well, what's within our means? I mean, we all have lives. Things get crazy and busy. And when that stuff happens and you're trying to follow a list of what you're supposed to do, it doesn't always align with everything else. So that guidance and support is really beneficial. And again, it's in the form of primarily consulting. And what that also looks like too, sometimes it's not just like one-on-one conversations. And yes, it is always great to have someone who, regardless of who it is, to talk these things through with you. But it's also good to have some like additional resources. Like one of the things that we help out with is like, what are additional resources like support? Like if you're trying to grow your team or you don't know about marketing and you have someone that could help with those tasks, could you hand off a document? They just follow it to the T. It's approved. You're okay. And now you can scale. And I don't mean like big or crazy because we throw that word around a lot sometimes, at least within means. So that way you can focus more on your development and you don't have to extend additional resources to learning all these other things, but you still have a pulse and you still have an understanding of what's being done.
Amazing. Yeah, there's one of our very first professors came in to talk about marketing. And one of the things he said that I've never forgotten is marketing is about half of your journey. You can build a beautiful game, but if nobody knows about it, it just doesn't go anywhere. There's so many stats that support that too at this point. Like 62 games on average are dropped on Steam every single day. And then on the App Store, there's now well over 1 million games on there. So you're competing with insane levels of other games. And building up an audience beforehand is one of the like tried and true simplest tools that you can do for yourself to make sure you actually have some bed to land on, and then also potentially a bed to grow from. People to get some traction, notice you through. So you told us that the topic of today was going to be how important it is to have an audience, to know who your audience is. I'd love to get your one-on-one on that. What do you mean? Why? Why should I care? I'm an indie dev. I just want to make a cool game.
Yeah, understand, and it's a great way to phrase that that last point there, is because it's like, hey, look, I want to make a game. It's important to me and everything else. Well, there's a few ways that I approach this, and the main one being is it's kind of a cold hard truth, but it seriously, it's not about you, all about you. Part of it is, but it's not all about you, because let's face it, regardless of your reasons for creating games, there's a lot of things that are tied to it. So that could be, personal fulfillment. Great. It could be really, serving a particular player audience. I mean, it could be for, let's say, money. That might not be the best reason to get in, but there's all these other reasons and why. But part of the understanding of the why is also that it's not all about you. Most of us, I would assume, are doing this because they're looking for some form of fulfillment, and that could be goals, that could be whatever you define as success, whatever that may be. That's part of the reason why we're doing it. We want to create experiences for players to really take in and enjoy. And one of the biggest reasons that I think most of us can relate to is like, when you like going back to what you just posed there, Will, is I want to create something that I grew up with. This is something I remember playing and I loved with. But the reality is, like, if you could take that simple concept and then apply it to other players that are probably just like you, now what you're doing is essentially aligning what your goal, what your desire and passion is with them. And that way it opens up a different perspective of, hey, look, now I'm going to lead with serving others as opposed to just serving my needs. And I think it just poses things a little bit differently. So at the core of it, let's just say, to really simplify, it comes down to empathy. Having empathy of players, having empathy of other people in general is always a good way to approach this. And one of the ways that you can actually start better understanding your audience instead of just saying, oh, I want to do this. And that's great. I think it's still important, but it's also because it's usually other people that you're doing this for too.
I love that. I think it fits really well with me as well. So I'm a designer rather than a marketer, which means I'm usually on the end of, man, I just want to make a cool game. But I completely understand at this point in my career the importance of identifying an audience. I love the concept of looking at it through the lens of empathy. And I think it's important to say, like, one of the pushbacks I get from indies for identifying a market is like, I'm just building a game for me. And then there's other, success stories out there that did the same thing. The one that I feel like I hear all the time is Stardew Valley, or maybe like a Minecraft. Why those games succeeded is because what that developer wanted to make for themselves happened to be something that hit an audience that existed, right? And what that rarely happens. And instead, we build something that we love, yes, but we have to remember who we're actually serving. Because if we're only serving ourselves, then ultimately our market size is one person. It's just us. And there will naturally be differences between what an existing and actual audience people want and what you want. And so by building some empathy and then learning to enjoy this, I think is a real big thing for designers. Learning to enjoy that process of trying to figure out what they're going to love, this group of actual people is going to love, is so much more satisfying to me than building something just for me. And I view developers who just want to build something for them almost as like proto developers. Like that, I think, is like a step that you have to get through first. And then you go, oh, actually, it's awesome to build stuff for other people.
Yeah, exactly. And, I want to call out too to one thing you just said in particular about, the passion side and doing it just for me. There is likely more than not a good chance that whatever you, everyone listening today, whatever you are really focused on and passionate about and doing just for yourself, more likely than not, there is probably a good chance that there's going to be other people just like you in that same mindset, and they're going to be players. So why don't we take that concept and idea a little bit further? Because I think, again, it's something that we can all relate to, but let's now look at it from the lens of empathy or understanding who else is our audience. So if that's the case, then you have whatever this project is, then I would say, why don't we go with this approach and lens? Because this really can, if you really want to boil it down to more like stuff that we generally don't think about it, like, okay, we have this desire and passion, but how does it relate to our core values and things like that? And I know this might sound a little fluffy, but at the end of the day, it's important because if you can start thinking about what aligns with me, what's important to me, what are my values and stuff as it applies to a game, could even be beyond that, depending on what kind of themes that you are incorporated into your narrative, for example, or not. Then you start having a sense of, okay, this is me as a person, and there's a good chance that other people, I have the ability to connect with them in some shape or form. So when we start thinking things this way, look, we're putting it back on us. This is what I'm about. This is what I want to do. Great. But now we want to connect the dots. So how do we start doing that? Well, there's two ways that I like to approach it. And they stem from the initial same process, and then they go into specifically your market and your audience. So I'll define these real quick. Market is going to be like, hey, what's your competition? And I'm not saying you're competing with other developers and stuff, but as you called out earlier, there's tons of projects hitting Steam every day. So in a way, it's definitely competition, but you're not like at war with these guys. You're with people. You're just simply a lot to compete with. So for your market, a lot of what I see people do is they quickly look, hey, what are other games in my space? What looks like mine? Like trying to get an initial vibe of other games that are out there. But then they look at popular titles. I mean, how many of us are, let's say, familiar with the process with pitch decks? And we put a pitch deck out there and like to a publisher, hey, look, this did really well. It made this much money. And that's it. That's all we're giving for a market analysis, right? Or we go a step further and say, oh, it's because of this game and this features, and we incorporate all the features that are pretty much known. And these guys made them a lot of money and they did it too. Great. This is all surface level stuff. This isn't really telling us any information. It's not providing any value to potential publishers or things like that. So how do you go a step further? Well, it can come down to simply looking at these games that, yeah, you are using for initial analysis. There's tools out there to kind of help guide you with this too, but then diving in a little bit deeper. And one way to do that is just looking at these reviews. And I don't just look at or calling out to the overwhelming positive or just the positive reviews in general, because if you think about it as like, let's say, I don't know, a consumer culture, not to put labels on anything, but when you go to Amazon, no one's looking detailed in the positive reviews as much as they are at the negative. We just do our assessment. Oh, it got so many stars. That validates things for me. Well, I think a lot of us do the same things with other things such as Steam. And when we do that, what we forget to see is like there could be opportunities or pain points that players are calling out to that we don't tend to look at because they're actually in the positive reviews. So by going into these games and start looking into, hey, what are players actually saying? What do they want? What are their pain points and what is fulfilling them? Then we can get a better understanding of players. And this type of research analysis starts informing everything from development decisions all the way to marketing. So that's the market. If we go now
that's
to the
awesome.
Sorry. So
no, keep going.
Thank you. So the next part is then the audience, because great, we got some ideas around development, some marketing insights, potentially lots of like gold nuggets essentially in there that are hidden. Like I said, more likely than not in the positive, not the negative. And usually there's a lot more positive reviews than negative, right? So lots of gold to be mined. But if we look in the audience side of things too, take the same process in terms of, hey, taking your, let's say, just top 5, and it's shared that before, but top 5 game comparisons. You look at those on Steam, and then now you go over to like social media platforms. And I guess a great way for this is Reddit. And punch those games in and just see what people are, you can look and see what people are commenting on and stuff too. But honestly, there's also free resources and tools out there that allow you to take user information and see where they're actually talking on Reddit. So is that going to be like, they could be talking a lot in, let's say, other things, like they could be involved with hiking, they could be involved with development, they could be any number of things. And what this does and what these tools can help do is start painting a picture of what your audiences really consist of. Because the focus at the initial source point was those other 5 game comparisons. And then when you start seeing down all these other interests that people have, you can start to at least get a picture, potentially cross-reference these things. And now you're like, wow, they're really into this particular theme. I happen to have this theme in my game. And now what you're doing is you are starting to connect the dots with your audience. And that's how you can better understand them. And when you understand them, when we get into things like marketing, when we're trying to figure out, hey, how do I say this to my audience? What channel do I use? And is this the right one? All those questions start becoming answered. And it ends up, even though there's a lot of time involved in this process I'm outlining, you start connecting those dots. So if you spent like X many hours within 1 month getting all these answers, now you have clear direction. So you're not wasting time going to social media, going to all these other things, trying to pitch to influencers, doing all these other things, because at least now you're leading with a good start of, like, let's say, when we're not just throwing things on the wall to see what sticks. Now we actually have a concoction that is sticky. We just want to see how well it sticks. We know it's going to stick. We just need to know how well. And that saves an astronomical amount of time, resources, and everything else. And which is great because you guys just want to focus on developing.
Amazing. That was like so much information all at once. I'm so happy to receive it. I also feel like a lot of it is really strong. I want to try to break it down into like, digestible action items. So I'm going to give you 5 things that I feel like I heard there. And then you can tell me if you'd like to modify any of them or add or subtract. So here's what I think I heard there. Number 1, first and easy one, set a top 5 game competitors or inspirations, not even competitors. Other games that fit your market, that are like what you strive to be, that you can learn from. Number 2, look at reviews, both positive and negative, on Steam, or pain points and information, thematic even, that these players want and are not getting delivered. Number 3, find out where they are actually talking which often isn't just Steam. It's often not even game related, or at least occasionally not even game related. Maybe a bunch of hiking dads super love your type of game for whatever reason. Number 4, read up on them, write down thematically what they're interested in, and how they seem to like to communicate and like to be communicated to. And then the last one that I feel like I got is identify. Oh, this is kind of the same one. Identify themes, what they like and want, as well as those pain points, and try to serve them over time. So I think more like 4. I'm going to cross out that third one, but there you go. So top 5 game companies, reviews, find out where they're actually talking and be there, and then come away with themes as well as likes and wants and pain points for this audience. That sound about right?
That is right. And what I'll do to even summarize and distill that whole thing even more is what I like to say is, look, we talk about making a great game, but that is so subjective. So to summarize that and everything else that I shared, I like to pose this framework, which will, I think, guide that whole process I outlined, which is serve a particular audience while surpassing existing value. It's very straightforward, specific, and it's actionable, and it provides a lot more insight and clarity and direction to everything else that we just shared.
Amazing. Serve a particular audience while surpassing existing value. Is that right?
Correct.
Amazing. I love it. I also love tiny distillations of larger lessons. All right, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second here, basically because I'm hoping to hammer the doubt in all the designers' heads that I know are potentially thinking this, or thinking some of this anyway. So all of this is good. And I think most people are like, yeah, I got to do that. But what they also are probably thinking is, man, this sounds like a lot of work. And that is often what dissuades people from doing it. They're like, oh, I just got to go build my game. Like, I can't be distracted trying to like read up on forums and stuff like that. Like, what the hell? So why you've kind of answered this, but like try to put it in terms for me from the developer's perspective. Why do I need to do this? Why can't I just make an awesome game? Why can't I just have a Stardew Valley? He didn't do this.
No, it's right. And you know what? I'll be honest. And I'm understanding, again, comes down to empathy. You can just go ahead and do that and not consider these things. And that's perfectly fine. And that's up to you. But here's some things to consider. I'll give it maybe if I can remember them all, some quick examples. Seth Coster, Butterscotch Shenanigans. They have a podcast called Coffee with Butterscotch. It's all 3 brother dev teams. I had him on my podcast, and I think he talked to this in other capacities before too. But one of the things they realized from a DevOps perspective, more so, was like, hey, they developed tools that took them sometimes within, I think, like a few months, up to 6 months of their development costs, because they understood a lot of bottlenecks in their processes, to the point where other devs were like, this makes no sense. You're pushing back your deadline by 6 months. Well, what they did in doing that was, by addressing those bottlenecks, they actually reduced their time frame. So yes, it took 6 months of time, but in the end, they actually met their deadline early. So that's an anecdote here, or just an example, but it's a similar concept. Basically, you're able to reduce your time there. In terms of, even though it might take a lot now, it's going to save you time, frustration. Like, there's so many people out there, and it's not just indie like solo devs or new devs. There's other people even in there that are still feeling they got stuck. They have all this information. They know the how-tos and everything, but they don't necessarily know the why or have that level of clarity. And that's another reason too. Having clear direction can make all the difference in how you move forward, and and when you have clarity, you have more confidence. When you have more confidence, when we talk about burnout, it's not just, and trust me, I know this is a big part of it, it's not just putting all those long hours in. Burnout is also doing, like, I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I'm spinning my tires. I'm stuck. I'm not getting anywhere. Now I'm getting burned out. And when you do that, you start losing the passion. And that's the last thing I want to see anybody have and happen, because that just sucks when you get to that point. I know, I've been there before. So those are a couple examples on how I would approach it. And honestly, the way I look at it is, it's about relationships, right? The thing is, when we look at players, I don't like to look at them just as players. in the process I outlined, what that also helps you do, again, looking back at empathy, but what it helps you do is look at players as people. There are far too many times I see people, have been in meetings or seen reports and all this stuff, and it's like, oh, the player profile or the player persona, and it's just listing out like gaming characteristics. And I'm like, but this is true, it's helpful, but they're just people. And the more we look at players as people, I think the more we are able to connect, resonate, and then everybody has a shared positive experience that we're all looking to create.
A fantastic answer there. I don't think I could have said that much better myself. I view very much the time you put into marketing, and really like any kind of market research or non-production time. It's the old Lincoln sharpening the axe metaphor. Like, yeah, that takes time. I have to sit down and sharpen my axe, and there's like hours that I could be adding more levels to my game. But the thing is, if you have 100 levels and they're all shit, like that's not ultimately going to actually serve you well. So if you're thinking about efficiency, and especially like as a designer here, if you're getting into your player's head and understanding who they are as a human being better, and what they care about, and what excites them, and what gets them out of bed each morning, and what gets them to play games, you're going to make such a better product for them. This is also why I am a huge advocate for team-based projects. It's really alluring to do solo development, and I understand that because I am very much an introvert myself. Like, I don't have to listen to anybody. I can just work this game. But ultimately, that means that you have to put on every single hat, which includes marketing. And if you don't put on every hat, including marketing, your chances of getting noticed and picked up are just dramatically lower. If you don't sharpen that axe, you're going to be beating that tree with a blunt axe for days instead of spending a couple hours to make it nice and cut it down easily.
And real quick, is there I would like to share one more point too, because I think this might be on someone's mind right now, when everything we talked about to this point, in a way, and I agree, this is all theory, right? Everything I'm talking about, it's like, let's say data-based theory, but it's still theory. So how do we validate these things? And it's just some quick examples of that is like you could do, and again, these are just examples just to give you a broad spectrum of what could be done. You could take some of these concepts in terms of messaging, that could be visual messaging, that could be textual messaging, and you could run a quick ads campaign without like little to no money. You could take that same thing and do an organic post campaign. You could reach out to influencers. You could and just get quick feedback type stuff. You could try all these things, and then basically the goal here in trying this and seeing is what sticks. So what do you mean what sticks? That could be in the form of results. So that could be people signing up for your email list. That could be getting wish lists. That could be any number of things. And so you lead with this theory, you test it out, and then you look at the results. And if they're not where you need to be, then you can back up and then readjust and then do that process again. But still, everything. You could also, if you have play testers, big problem with play testers is most of us can maybe get a handful of them, maybe if we're lucky, like 10, 20, outside of like acquiring services to do so. But if you have play testers that are giving you valuable feedback, and then you cross-reference this with the analysis that you've done, now I only need to spend X amount of time getting 10, 15 play testers opposed to getting this huge data set, because now I have this whole market information that validates what they're saying. So it's not a small data set anymore. It's a small data set that's validating a larger data set.
Love that. Yeah, well said. I think there's a mindset shift, especially working here at the Indie Game Academy. So in an education setting, we're a boot camp, not an established like higher education institution, but still we get some of the same problems. Something I identified at some point was the you sort of learn in school to prove an answer right instead of getting the answer right, if that makes sense. So I think pitching is a perfect metaphor. You're not pitching to convince somebody of something. You're pitching to tell them the truth. You're trying to find what will actually satisfy a market, what will actually build an incredible game. You're not pitching to try to tell them the things that'll convince them that what is actually going to make a beautiful game. And that's like a fine distinction that has been difficult for me to even wrap my head around, and I think for many of our students. But ultimately, like, you are looking for the truth, what is actually true of your audience, and not what is a vanity, metric that's going to
Yeah.
convince people that you know what you're talking about. It's just
Yeah.
what the audience actually wants. It's not what makes it look like you know what the audience wants.
Exactly. And one thing I'll add, and this is kind of a quick little tangent here. A lot of times when I talk about audience, it's not just players, okay? Think about your audience too as influencers. Think of your audience as publishers, VCs, investors, things like that.
Hmm.
Because this whole process I think is really helpful in understanding and looking at things that way too, because again it comes down to serving your audience and whoever that may be, and whoever consists within that, because the more that you focus on that, so it's like, what does an investor want? They want to get a return on their investment, so you best have ways on how to do that. If you're looking for funding and you're looking for investors, that's one way to do that. Again,
Hmm.
consider what the audience, your extended audience, let's call it, because that's super helpful there.
Yep. I love it. All right. It is time for community questions. I've hijacked you for enough of our time here. We've actually got a ton of community questions. People are very curious about this. I will warn everybody, marketing is incredibly important, but it's also not the secret. I think some people think that if I just market it well enough, it'll all work out. So,
Yeah.
Rick, I'd love for you to have the first community question of the day. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks. Andrew, it's good to see you again. I have a question about if you are an indie team leader and you're working on a project and you're confident with it and you're thinking, okay, let me get somebody for marketing on board. What are the qualities I should look for in that person to know that like they're actually going to be good for getting the word out about my game?
Yeah, that's a great question, and some things that I've dealt with myself and working with others. But apparently, I would say like one, like get a good sense of. It kind of goes back to what I was sharing before, like kind of not necessarily asking them outright, but get a good sense of who they are, what their values are, how do they align first with the team, because communication is going to be the most important part there. Because if they can say they could do all this, if they have all these credentials and everything else that says that they can do that, if they're not communicating that well, that's going to be difficult. It will make it a challenge. The other thing too is if and I'm not just trying to say, my approach is the best, but honestly, I think anybody who practices things with the better approach with empathy, understanding things, and also that, being mindful that like just certain specific results, being very focused on numbers isn't necessarily everything. Getting an idea of sentiment, getting keeping an open mind with things is going to be very helpful, and that they're really communicative of that. Because hey, let's face it, sometimes you can get a really good marketer, has all the experience, but if they're really super focused on one way of doing things and not keeping an open mind, not opening up to questions, not saying like, hey, look, I know I'm the marketer, but I might not know. There's a lot of things that I don't know, but let's investigate, let's communicate and collaborate with each other to find out more. That's the kind of person I think that's going to add a lot more value, whether they're seasoned or not. As long as they have that drive and willingness to communicate, that's going to make all the difference.
Awesome. So it sounds like really the key thing is finding somebody who will come in and get involved with your team that people feel like they can trust, and through that chatting they can extract the message that you're trying to convey and they can truly understand it, and then they can take whatever experience they have and turn that into strategies, but it's based off of what you're trying to tell the world.
Exactly. Yep.
Cool.
I think it's
Thank you.
that sounds like an echo of hiring anybody, by the way, which is very much like find people who echo the same values that you echo. And that can be done very literally, especially if you've taken the time to establish what your values are and what you're aiming for, both personally and as a team. But then also, like, it's all about vibe. That's my personal opinion. If you get into a meeting with somebody and you're like, I don't know, this feels a little off. Like, that's often enough for me to be like, they're probably not the right hire. But if you get into a meeting with somebody and you're like shooting the shit and enjoying talking about the game and you're all excited about like, oh man, it'd be so cool if like this happened and that happened, that's the kind of person you want on the team, I think, regardless of their profession or discipline. That's my take anyway. All right, next person is Mike. Mike doesn't have a mic with him. I didn't intend to do that. So I'm going to read the question for him. He has asked me to try to emulate his voice. I have no idea how to do that. Mike is an extremely energetic guy, very goofy. So we'll go for it. hey, what are the good practices to set realistic expectations for my game? We'll take it.
So okay, so good practices, to the good realistic practices to
Yeah.
execute for the game. So
Realistic expectations, I think, is the
sorry.
real question, which is, yeah, realistic expectations, which I think is actually really good for indies. How do you set realistic expectations?
Yeah, so expectations, let's say, in terms of as far as I'm interpreting this, like results and things like that. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't go like crazy high, right? I think it's good to be ambitious with certain goals and things like that. Why? Because it can push you to drive a little bit more. But honestly, not a lot of people may align with that thinking too. I think kind of like judge yourself a little bit, like quick eternal evaluations. Like, hey, if I push myself too hard, am I going to push myself harder? So let's say if this is the cool goal I want and this is the reach, am I going to get here? If that's you, great, then do it. If it's not, then be like, maybe it's just keeping it there. So what does that equate to and stuff? I mean, I know sometimes where there's information out there about like benchmarks of like where you should be, what your game's going to dictate. Oh, I need 7,000 wish lists. I need 40,000 wish lists for X, Y, or Z to happen. Honestly, the reality of sometimes that may not happen. And what I would say is when you're coming to setting realistic expectations, don't be hard on yourself. Know that you have a plan, that you're making decisions, and that you're sticking to it, but with flexibility. Because like, don't keep doing the same thing over and over just to find out you're getting the same result. You may want to pivot, change things up a bit, but don't be hard on yourself either. Because I think, again, that can lead to burnout, lose all that passion. You're probably on the right track. Usually what happens is this is what you're doing for a while. It goes up a little bit, and this could be over the course of a couple games too. And the next thing you know, boom. All right. So, and again, it might not be that straightforward, but I would say don't sell yourself short. Sometimes it takes longer than we would like it, but don't be hard on yourself either, because our inner critic could sometimes be the worst of us and not get what we want to get in the not help us get what we want to achieve in the end.
Yeah, it's like it is an incredibly hard one to try to decide what you're actually aiming for, what is appropriate, what is realistic. I've done exactly one Kickstarter. Well, I guess I've worked on a few Kickstarters, but I've run one Kickstarter, and we told people that we wanted to make 30,000. That was the public facing goal, and we made like 32,000. Our internal goal was 150,000. So ultimately, like, we made way less than we were really hoping to make, and it was enough for us to publish the game, and that was cool. But there was sure a lot of disappointment on the team.
Yeah.
But where I try to be with it at this point in my life is like, one, fantastic lesson. And two, like, hey, we got to publish the game. And that's something that, like, I don't remember the actual stat, but it's a pretty low percentage of people. And especially this was a board game. So especially board games, often don't succeed in even getting their funding goals and being able to publish. So I think like, I'm a believer. I feel like there's sort of two main mindsets, like set the goal that I know I can hit, or set the goal that's kind of aspirational. And I tend to be in that second department, even though it can make you pretty sad sometimes. Because I think like it's better to strive than to just settle, I guess. That's my general sentiment about it.
I would agree with that too. And I love how you called out about like, whatever it is, whether it's the project, things within the project, you are going to have failures left and right. There's no way around it. And a lot of these things that we see that are considered overnight successes, they failed a lot before they got to that point. So instead of, know you're going to fail, but I think more importantly, whatever you do, whatever you accomplish, little to big, it's pat yourself on the back, take a moment, don't think of it as just some little thing, because the more you think that, then next thing, it's not going to help validate things. It's not going to help give you that confidence. So when you achieve those things, give yourself that little, confidence boost. So like, hey, I did that, because I mean, that's actually how our brain works too. It's how we learn to walk over time. Your brain is like registering, yep, I can step. But then you go to, you're bedridden for 6 months, and then your brain doesn't have that validation, that feedback, that positive feedback. It's the same thing. Our minds work that way. So keep doing it. And I know it might sound like fluff, but that is a big factor in how you can keep notching up and hit those aspirational goals.
I love that. Yeah, eternal balance for me is like the positivity versus the realism. Because I think if you live all the way in the positivity, you don't learn lessons. But then if you live
Yes.
all the way in the realism, like you just wind up getting depressed.
Yeah, that
So
fine balance.
yeah, some combination of those two. All right, Victor is on stage patiently waiting. Victor, would you like to ask the next community question?
Hello, hello. Thank you very much. I feel like I'm on in the middle of like a Venn diagram of two great podcasts because of you two. I listen to both podcasts all the time.
Awesome. Happy to hear
Um,
that.
let's see here. So I've been told it's better to spend all my marketing dollars in one big burst versus over a long period of time to get better velocity. Is that the better idea? And also, I would like to ask, should I be the one spending my marketing dollars, or should I hire an agency? Because I feel like you end up paying the agency, obviously, but then presumably they get better results than you would have, even if you had more money.
Yeah. So I'll answer the second one real quick, which is I would say it really depends on you. But yes, I would say in most cases, if you have the funds, if you feel like you not just have a good rapport, but there's a great level of transparency, understanding of what that agency can do and what they can accomplish and everything else. Also, just a quick vet check, meaning, ask to contact people that they worked with and not just the best people. What were the situations that didn't go according to plan? And just be like, it's like, hey, look, I'm not trying to call you out on bad things. I just wanted to understand how was that relationship managed and everything, and take that with a grain of salt, because sometimes those things are very important. But ultimately, I would say if you have the resources and the means, yeah, probably an experienced marketer, an agency, or whoever in that field is probably going to do a better job than either yourself. And even if you can, again, that's about the time and resources that it's going to take, because just because you're saving this money, unless you really need that elsewhere, it's probably going to be better spent, especially if it's allocated or earmarked for marketing. And the other question, I apologize, it was about one big burst or slowly over time, correct?
Yeah, for
Okay.
paid ads, like click ads and stuff like that.
Okay. So specifically for paid ads like that, I would say it can vary, because it really depends on kind of your intent, what you're looking to do and accomplish. So let's say if you're coming to a launch, I would say then, yeah, definitely, or there's a significant event coming up, I would say, yes, you want to go ahead and put as much pay over a certain amount of time as possible. It's just going to amplify everything else that you're likely doing at that time. So that's for a release. But let's say if on the other end of the spectrum, if let's say what we talked about earlier in terms of validating some of these concepts, you've done some research, you're like, all right, I have a good understanding here of what my audience wants. Let's further validate that. You could do a campaign for like $250, 500, get that insight and data, and then try again another thing. So, and that could be like a campaign. And what I mean is another period of time in which you're running ads. You could do a paid campaign for, let's say, a significant event you have coming up. It could be a Steam Next Fest. It could be some showcase that you're participating in. It could be the fact that you're announcing your demo. You could then run ads there. So then it's, and again, it could be like long-term for data gathering, and then it could be short-term for amplification. That's kind of how I would break it down. I worked on with was it Strafon studio, the Wandering Village, and I ran all their Facebook ad campaigns for a period of about 6 months. We learned everything that we needed to. We validated it. Helped informed other decisions that we're making from a marketing perspective. And then when they released into early access, we just knew everything. We had it dialed down, and we just let the budget rip. Because we knew what needed to be done. We were effective with it and stuff too. And again, it's that strategy in particular could be also done by any agency or whatever. So it gives you a good idea on how you could probably leverage paid advertising the most effectively.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Top-notch answer. To give like a pat on the back for hiring people, I have found almost 100% of the time. Some people suck as always, but most of the time, when spending money to hire somebody else to use my ads, to do my ads for me, I have had better results than spending the same amount of money in total doing it myself. So
And that's
Yeah.
exactly why they were doing their ads initially, and then they ended up, coming to someone that they knew could manage them. So, and now they have enough information, and now they're managing them themselves.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, I've invited Michael up to the stage now for the next question. Michael, would you like to ask that first question of yours?
Yeah. Yeah. How best to bring a game back from a bad launch? Among Us did it, so we know it's possible. And I'm currently working on a indie RTS, just for context.
Okay, cool. Yeah, this is a great question, and I'll be honest, a kind of a challenging one too. There's a lot of factors that can contribute to, let's say, a poor launch. It could be related to marketing, it could be related to bugs and things like that. It could be positioning. I mean, there's a lot of factors at play, and in fact, I've actually had a recent conversation with someone else, kind of in a similar subject. So what I would say is it kind of like take a moment, kind of reflect back and like look at a high level, what are the things that were done and potentially weren't. And sometimes it may look back into even going back to that process I outlined a little bit. Now, let's say looking at the market, how are you positioned within the market, and everything else like that. Now, I'm not saying go to let's say the same depth in terms of, hey, we got some ideas here from reviews and how we can, change the development of this. No, obviously that ship has sailed, right? But you might get some other insight there to what players really like. And if players specifically like certain things that your game delivers, maybe then it can shift over into a bit of positioning. Maybe there could be other factors in terms of, okay, how long do you plan on supporting this project? Is that part of like your roadmap for this project, or is it? And sometimes it may even come down to, hey, look, we may need to abandon this project. We launched, we did what we could with it, and now we want to allocate our resources to the next project, because sometimes after this just overall review, assessment of the project, what could be done, if it can be done, sometimes the resources might be spent better on a different project. So it's hard to say, because this is getting into a lot of areas where it's like there's a lot more potential evaluation to be done, but it can be done. And unfortunately, I don't recall or know enough of or evaluated what, let's say, Among Us did, but but I would say that obviously their decision was to stick with, maintain by design, and the type of game it was. It made sense that they would continue to maintain that, and then eventually someone caught wind of it. It just boosted awareness, and then the rest is history. So, but again, if looking at those things, seeing what you do, and knowing, hey, what's your not roadmap necessarily for that project, but what do you have for a runway in terms of like resources, money? Can you continue to support that? And after what point can't you? And then if you know what that end is, then that's at a point you got to make that call and be like, do we continue to push forward and stuff, or do we move on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very low budget effort because it's just like 2 people. So, yeah. But the interesting piece of it is, like, it did really well in playtests. It has no negative reviews at all. And yet, once we put a price tag on it, people just stopped playing, and then we made it free again, and people started playing again.
Yeah. So, and again, like that's another little piece of insight that could be helpful in kind of understanding those things where, I mean, there's all sorts of things that can happen. And like, as you said, with price could be a big factor too, in terms of the perceived value that's happening. This is why I'm not a big fan of when you see games that are going 80% off, unless they're like been, released like 20 years ago. That's what, but usually now they're still trying to get the most. But yeah, perceived value could be a factor. I mean, there's lots there to kind of consider, and that's part of one of the things out of that whole process of that evaluation that I was referring to.
Yeah. Thank you for asking the question there, Michael. I'm going to send people back to the audience. I'm going to ask one last question for the sake of Mike. Also, to throw a quick 2 cents onto that last one, it's really hard. I would imagine, this is a guess, I would imagine that if it's these two people and it's this smaller affair, that you may have had some false positives about the game, essentially. It's easy. People who like you and know you personally will almost always tell you a more positive response or give you more positive feedback than they are actually thinking, because they like you and they want to be good to you. And so once there's a price tag, though, it gets real. And now suddenly they are only going to buy the game if they actually want the game. So you may have been a victim of sort of false positives there. But that's a sort of a guess from the outside. All right, last question of the day comes from Mike. Mike, I'm not going to do your voice again. I'm sorry. Mike says, what are some ways to measure stickiness or the lack of stickiness? And how do you communicate this with people who do not have a marketing background?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, the way I see this is measuring the stickiness. So let's say you have that insight, you have that idea of, okay, people like this, that. How you create a plan in terms of, okay, how do we communicate this and everything, that could be done, like, and you're asking, like, kind of like, how do we get the sticky factor, like, how do we know, okay, it's resonating, it's connecting, it's getting results. So it could be a few things. Let's say here, I'll use some really quick low-hanging fruit examples that I think anybody can go ahead and try. Let's it's a common one, like a Steam page. How is the information there being communicated in your short description? Same thing with your screenshots, like looking at those things and changing them up. And even your tags. One of the things I tell people when it comes to their Steam tags is look at what the actual tags results are of other games in that space. Because sometimes they're like, oh, more tags means more people can come in, and it could be but when you're looking at those tags and you're seeing other games that are associated with that, do they align with what your game is, or are they drastically different? And if that's the case, that might be a form of misalignment. So so what I mean by, like, let's say you get this insight, these players also like, this audience also likes these types of game stuff and whatnot too, but also make sure, if that is the case, does your game align there too? And also, how are you communicating with them? Are you being very clear and direct with that too? And then, are your images being represented in a certain way where it's visually it provides visual context? So that might be a very quick, easy example that I would say doesn't necessarily directly relate, but a way to approach it. Others are like, take what apply it differently, take an approach with that information, and let's say post it somewhere on social media. It could be Twitter's a great tool for quick validation. It could be hard if you don't have much of a following or it doesn't get picked up right away. So I would take that one with a grain of salt. But I think one of the best places too, especially within certain interest groups or subreddits, post something there to see what resonates, what connects with people. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to post something, let's say, directly related to your game, because without going into a different subject or more detailed on the Reddit side, that could come off as promotional. But basically, you want to see what is the sentiment about this particular topic. And a great way to approach is like, hey, I've been working on this game, and let's say you want to kind of validate a feature that you have. That's a more direct approach without saying what your game is and stuff. And then, or just talking about this one thing and then showing a screenshot of your game, but not like any branding or links back to your Steam page. And let's say a group that traditionally wouldn't be associated or considered as gamers or game related, then you can start getting what that idea. I knew one indie dev that was doing a similar technique. He took shots of his game footage, and it was of a guy using a bow and arrow. And he went to an archery subreddit and he called out, he's like, hey, this form and structure and everything else, how does this align? That did remarkably well in terms of getting some feedback there. And the likelihood that, let's say, people on Reddit are also possibly more likely than not into games is a good factor. So those are some quick examples. Another one too is, I can't think of it. Strange Horticulture. Their publisher did this similar, where they were talking about this concept of one of the in-game items, which is a plant. And then they share this within like the D&D community with dungeon masters, and they were like all about this one plant. They started now using it into their games, and that's one way that they blew up, right? Because these guys are like, whoa, these people, we definitely love this concept of this plant. And everybody started talking about it, and all that they did was share a plant that was in game with this community. And there's other ways, and then boom, that's a sticky factor. So, and that's other ways to not only get the stickiness of some of these concepts and ideas with your messaging or posts, but also to then it's a form of expanding your audience too. Like that's something they just saw, didn't anticipate, and boom.
I love that. So here, I'm going to ask a follow-up. I know we're a little over time here, but I have a follow-up on this. I think like that's all excellent ways of building stickiness. For us to prove stickiness, for us to know that we have stickiness. When the game's launched, that's easy. You just look at retention. But when the game is not yet launched, how do you know if your game is starting to look sticky or not? Do you have stats? Do you have like just gut feels?
I would say it's a combination, because like the best way is like I mean, if people are going to your, like the quick and easiest one we all gravitate towards is, hey, if they're going to our Steam page and we're getting wish lists, great. If we're keeping that momentum, if we're getting it steady and building up gradually, that's great. Other ones could be like, if you're building, let's say, an audience or rather a community, you're getting more people into your Discord from other posts and stuff because of what you're talking about. That could be another thing. So you're basically looking for like KPIs, key performing indicators, or results around other factors. Could be email lists, could be page visits to your website. It could be, community members coming in, anything that could be somewhat measurable. That's what I look at. The only thing I'd be a little bit careful about is what we can sometimes call vanity metrics. So if you like post on Twitter and you get a tons of likes and stuff, but then everything else in terms of an actual cold hard, let's say conversion or result is stagnant or non-existent or not happening, then just be careful of that. So those likes and all those other things aren't necessarily an indication of the stickiness. It's that plus getting some type of results. And it doesn't have to be very high on those vanity type metrics. As long as you're getting stuff in, then you can further like assess and be like, okay, how do I do this better? How do I improve? That's how I'd probably approach it.
Love that. Yeah, that's nice and simple. There's KPIs, because it's like a businessy term, is another thing that indie devs love to ignore or like stay away from. But all that means is like numbers. your
results.
Yeah, you're tracking your wish lists. Yeah, you're tracking your wish lists. That's a KPI. Set a couple of those KPIs, and I love your point about making sure that it is like an actual important metric. Vanity metrics do you nothing. Feels great to have followers, but if they aren't buying your game, doesn't matter. So ultimately, pick those stats that like directly that you can show will wind up getting you sales. Wish lists are tracked for a reason, for this exact reason, in fact. And then as long as they're continuing to go up, I think that's a great one. The less hard metric stuff, you'll sort of know when you've got a special game on your hands. Like people will show up to your Discord that have like found your Discord through really weird means. They're like, man, I went looking all over the internet to try to find you. Like that's when you know something's interesting and people are really excited. People will deliberately ask to work on the project. That's, I think, a really good indicator that you've got something special. Like, oh man, this is so cool. I would love to help you out. People will make fan art and other goofy stuff like that. Like once you start to have some real community engagement, I think that's also when you know like this is special, and that's independent from metrics. Metrics are very important too, though. All right, I've kept you too long. It's the end of the episode. Before we say goodbye, I would like a homework assignment from you for the audience, Andrew. This is something we do on this podcast. So what is something that the audience can do in the next week that'll take them just about an hour to practice some of what we talked about here today?
Geez, because there's like so much we could do, but hey, great question. Focused. Honestly, I'll keep this real simple because I don't think we do enough of this in general. And that is keep an open mind and look at what you're doing now with your game. How are you being empathetic of players or just people in general? Whatever your goals are in terms of, let's say, getting more players, community members, even if it's like funding, practice empathy. Put yourself in that person's shoes, that audience member shoes, wherever they fit in as it relates to the broader audience that I mentioned earlier. Think about what their interests are, what their needs are. Basically, it's just really a thought exercise. Do what you can and even write it out while you're taking this hour or even a half an hour, and write out what do you think is going to be the best way that you can serve them. And again, it goes back to that framework I was mentioning before. How can you serve a particular audience while surpassing existing value? And that's applicable to everybody across the board. That would be my homework assignment.
Awesome. All right. So your homework assignment is simple. Practice empathy for us. Think about the audience for your game, or if you don't have a game you're working on, a hypothetical game or an existing game you love, perhaps. Think about who that audience is, and then write out specifically what you think is the best way to serve them. If you do that and you're willing to share, you can tag us on LinkedIn. You can also tag Andrew, I'm sure, at Indie Game Academy, at Andrew Pappas. We'll leave links down below. And you can post it in the Discord if you want a little bit of a smaller community to be checking it out. All right, before we say goodbye, Andrew, is there anything you'd like to plug or any last messages you'd like to say here?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you all for having me here, Indie Game Academy. It's been a great pleasure. And yeah, if you guys are looking for any like insight, some resources, things like that, or even info, well, one, you can check out my website. It's rengenmarketing.com. There I have a blog post that I need to start putting a little bit more content there, but there's some things there. There's a new thing I just launched. The thing I was talking about before with the market analysis, we're doing this new thing that you can get a free market analysis report. It's of one of your titles. The directions are on there, so it's up in the nav. So rengenmarketing.com, see the free report, and you could get that as well. And the other thing is, if you haven't already been a listener, check out the podcast I host. It's called Indie Game Movement, and it's about the marketing and business of indie games, where I interview a bunch of industry veterans and professionals about indie games. So yeah, those are the two things, rengenmarketing.com and Indie Game Movement podcast, basically wherever you listen to podcasts.
Awesome. Fantastic. We'll put links to all of that down below. Andrew, thank you for your time. This has been a really fantastic episode. Thank you for answering these questions. For those who ask questions, thank you for asking. And for those who listen, thank you for listening. We ask, as always, that you send this along to just one other person who you think might benefit from Andrew's wisdom here. Help us out. Help us spread a little bit of awareness for the show. And besides that, we'll be here Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern time in the Discord. There's links to join. We'd love to have you for the next one. Ask your own questions. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Take care, Andrew. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Same here.